You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another edition of Assembly Call Radio, where we discuss the most important topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 1040th episode of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of September 19th, 2024. I am your host, Jared Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes a shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred on Sunday when Eric Bossi of 24/7 Sports reported that Jalen Harralson, a longtime Indiana recruiting priority, had canceled his official visits to Kansas and Missouri and would be moving up his Purdue visit to this weekend, after which he wants to get in decision-making mode. This matters for a few obvious reasons, and we're still in the offseason, so those reasons warrant us breaking our self-imposed recruiting talk embargo to discuss it. First, Harralson is Indiana's number one priority in the class of 2025. Braylon Mullins, who is visiting Bloomington this weekend, has made that a closer discussion than anyone could have imagined. But Harralson is the number 14 ranked player in the class, and he is the kind of versatile talent that you may be able to build an offense around as early as his freshman season. Second, anytime you can prevent one of your top recruiting priorities from visiting Bill Self or even Dennis Gates for that matter, it's a win. And it proves Harralson wants to stay close to home, with his other finalists being Michigan State and Notre Dame. Third, getting an early commitment from Harralson would be a massive start to Indiana's 2025 recruiting class. There is no guarantee it would influence fellow high school targets like Mullins, Trent Sisley, or Eric Ryby, who are also visiting Bloomington this weekend, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. And such a commitment would allow Mike Woodson and his staff to have a better idea of how to set up their recruiting chessboard moving forward with one cornerstone commitment already in place. Of course, all the commitment talk is very premature. Harralson will first have to resist the draw of a single national runner-up banner in West Lafayette, and will have to hope his emotions aren't swayed by all the perfectly engineered brick and plaid. Then the Hoosiers will still have to earn the commitment over Tom Izzo, who has made a frustrating habit of pulling uber-talented players out of the Hoosier state. But on a week when the only other news is a few media day quotes and the schedule release, this tidbit is the best news for IU fans hoping the future holds more glory than the recent past. All right, now let me introduce my co-host this week. Coach is away doing some family stuff and preparing to help pack the rock on Saturday. But here with me, we have the Kellen Moore of Girls Youth Sports Coaching in Cincinnati, the president emeritus of the Robert Johnson Fan Club, and the fun-loving bracketologist who looms over all others like he's Umar Ballo.
The best of youth sports coaching, you know that we got 'em. When it comes to analytic trends, you know he can spot 'em. For first-class bracketology, if you want the top, you gotta go bottoms. If you want the top, you gotta go bottoms. If you want the top, you gotta go bottoms.
Andy, what is your bottoms line on the last week in Indiana basketball?
Well, given our text exchange earlier in the week, I would have bet good money that I would have been the Nick Sirianni of youth sports coaching. So I guess I'm glad you didn't do that. But
we've used that one. So
I know. Are you keeping track of which ones you've used? Good for you. Also haven't coached anything in like 2 years, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, the other one was going to be the Deshaun Foster of Girls Youth Sports Coaching, and I didn't want to go there.
What a
insulting, Jared.
Yeah,
insulting.
What a thinly veiled insult that would have been. Anyway, I mean, it's hard not to talk about the football Hoosiers here, but I will not, because there actually was at least some basketball news, I think, with the media day. I obviously you look at that, it's we'll talk about that later. I think a lot of things that people want to hear, and so we'll see what that actually looks like when it comes to getting on the court. But it sounds like it's been a positive offseason, at least in terms of bringing guys together and trying to build some chemistry amongst a group of guys who really have not played together all that much. So I do think there's some positive things to take away from that, in addition to some of the other comments that were made. And then the schedule, we'll break that down as well. I think it is another tangible piece that says that things are here. We can plan, as Jay texted us, if we want to plan our Pacific Northwest road trip. We can get started doing that. Lots of options out there, but always good to see the schedule so you can start to figure out how the games come together. The opponents, where you're playing them, but trying to understand what the tough stretches are in the season. And there are a couple in this one, but really understanding, where those are going to come and trying to put that together is exciting, and another step toward the season actually getting here, so we can stop all the speculation and all that stuff and see some actual basketball.
Well said. All right. And also here with us, he is a senior writer at Sports Illustrated, a self-renowned shot doctor, still looking for patients, and a man who will personally volunteer to block for Caleb Williams in Chicago since the Bears' offensive line clearly doesn't want to do it.
Analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
Ryan, what would you like to rant or ruminate about this week?
I mean, the Bears, man. Come on. Don't do Caleb that way. Anyway, no, I will say we talked about this the other day, and I felt like basketball media day was the most muted reaction to a basketball media. And I'm not talking about Indiana. I'm talking about in general, the Big Ten. And we were kind of talking about it. I think part of the reason is this new Big Ten football conference that has come together. I really think people are into so far, and the matchups. And you saw how many Indiana people went out to LA. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to play at the UCLA. And also look at the standings right now, folks. Your Indiana Hoosiers are in first place in the Big Ten at 1-0 and the better point differential than the Michigan State Spartans. So they are in first place. I think it is interesting how this shifting landscape of college sports is leading to these major changes. And one of them is nobody seemed to care about media day. And maybe it's because it's a lot of, coach speak and things like that. And everybody thinks they have a great team and everybody thinks they're in a great place and all of that. But it is interesting how Indiana fans are very focused on football right now, given what Curt Cignetti's done and how they've started the season. Obviously it's early. A lot of things can change, but I mean, this week for a week 4 matchup, I was telling these guys that, USC going to Michigan, it's the most hype I've heard from a USC regular season games as Pete Carroll was coaching there. And that's because all these different matchups, people are really excited. People are traveling to new stadiums. They're traveling to new cities, visiting new college towns. I'm sure Bloomington will get that as well. It's a really interesting time. I think there are a lot of negatives we've covered on this podcast about those things, but it's hard not to get caught up in the excitement of it as well. And I mean, Indiana played in the Rose Bowl last weekend. I mean, that's huge. It's just a crazy thing that probably nobody thought would happen. And I'm honestly, I'm excited for Indiana to get to play at the Coliseum at some point. It just, from the uniform view stadium perspective, it's pretty awesome. And so yeah, while this is ostensibly a basketball podcast, I think it's worth mentioning that this is, a really cool time for other sports as well, including the football program. And that may take away some of the shine from the basketball program, but it's definitely worth mentioning.
I mean, it's great to just be here in mid-September and not just be counting down the days to basketball because there's nothing else to look forward to. It's incredible, honestly.
It is. And I think that we'll see how this season ends up. Obviously, Curt Cignetti did not get hired to win a championship in year one. You know what I mean? Or to turn everything around.
That's your opinion.
To turn everything around at once. I do have to Google him. I still haven't yet. He commanded me to Google him, and I have not yet. So I got to figure out who this guy is.
Ryan's only been on Bing. He'll get the real story when he Googles
eventually, I'll stop asking Jeeves. But it's going to be a project too. And he's already recruiting for the future and doing a good job with that and all of, as everybody is, but still he's building something longer term. And so, if there are a couple losses down the road, that doesn't mean that there's still not excitement about what this guy is doing. And so I think it's really worth keeping an eye on not only what he's doing this year, but like how that plays for the future, because I do think there's a chance to do something really special here for him.
Yes. Breaking news: the bar for Indiana is not an undefeated season.
Yeah, it's pretty low.
Although,
actually, looking mildly competent in week 1, we were all texting each other like, "What's going on? Is the other team that bad, or is Indiana like actually competent?" And our answer I mean, celebrating that win over UCLA at some point that actually got kind of sad for UCLA, but a once proud university.
Oh, never. We will take as many butt kickings as we can deliver. We've been on the other end of so many of those. I'll enjoy them all of them. But we will have some IU football talk coming up here a little bit later in segment 3. But hey, we do have here breaking news here. We have a special guest lurking in the background tonight who has made the leap from audience member to community member to producer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's producer Eddie, who you don't see here on the screen, but his voice is here. Eddie, are you there?
Google me.
But Eddie is here.
I'm doing that right now.
As one of the ways that we're trying to improve the show here is up the production quality. And so Eddie is going to be here to help us out, help me out, help Andy out, help coach out when we're producing, allow us to do some more things, allow us to focus a little bit more on doing the show. So, if it feels a little bit like, maybe the sounds are just slightly off or the chemistry's not quite there, just give us a couple shows and we'll get it better. We promise, because Eddie is a pro at this stuff, and we're really excited to have him as part of the team. And he'll probably pop on every now and then as he gets more comfortable. But we're very excited to have Eddie with us here, helping us produce and make this show better, which is going to be awesome. So Hoosier headlines. We're not going to, or we will go through Hoosier headlines in segment 1, and the main headline is the schedule. So we're going to talk about that in a second. We also had Media Day, and so we will react to some of the comments that came out of Media Day, and then we'll talk about a few football topics in segment 3. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, let's do what we always do, and let's talk about our presenting sponsor.
Home field apparel, wear one for the team.
Yes, this edition of Assembly Call Radio, just like all shows on the Back Home Network, presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel, where they have the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you will find anywhere, and it's not just Indiana. Home Field has unique, interesting designs printed on the softest, most comfortable fabrics for over 175 colleges and universities now. It may even be more, plus plenty of other brands like Little 5, IndyCar, and much more. And the thing that's fun about being a Home Field customer is that they're always expanding and trying something new, like their recent launch of corduroy hats, which includes Indiana, of course, a beautiful red corduroy hat with a little white band on it, retro script Indiana. They also recently released these classic coaching jackets, which look like they were tailor-made for Bill Mallory or Hayden Fry or Bo Schembechler to be wearing on a rainy Saturday in October. The only bad part is that the Indiana jacket sold out immediately. And this is the blessing and the curse of being an IU fan who shops at Home Field. We're included in every launch, but the IU gear can oftentimes run out faster than anyone else. That's why if you want to have a shot of getting the stuff when it's released, you really need to follow them on social, subscribe to their texts, their emails, get their app. Make sure you're staying up to date so you don't miss anything. And plus, when you register and sign up for the app, you start to accrue points that help you get to free stuff. I was actually shocked once I did that, how quickly I got to free items. Like, it's a really generous kind of frequent buyer program. So for all those reasons, make sure that you're following Home Field everywhere that you can. And when you go to Home Field Apparel, you can use our promo code HOME23. That'll give you 15% off your entire first order. But again, if you're following them, if you're connected in all these places, you'll find plenty of other opportunities for flash sales and ways to save money. But if you haven't ordered yet, use that promo code HOME23. You'll get 15% off. Once again, the website homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. All right. Well, Andy, I know you did a lot of work breaking down the schedule, and so we're going to get to that. Before we do it, I just want to give folks a quick rundown of some new stuff that we have going on at the Back Home Network, because there's a ton of good stuff going on right now. As you can imagine, the Crimson Cast feed is going nuts, both in terms of how much content they're putting out and the traffic. Caitlin texted me the other day. He's like, man, traffic on Crimson Cast is like I haven't seen before. Which, Ryan, to your point, I mean, just the excitement about the football program. And of course, you know, they're as good as it gets when it comes to IU football podcasting. So Galen did a great interview with Rhett Lewis that is there in the feed. He's also doing a weekly Bison chat with members of the IU sports media department. So check out all of that. That's all in the podcast feed and on the YouTube channel. Our friends at X's and Joe's, Bob and Mike, They keep churning out new, just in-depth researched episodes. They recently did one on whether or not the blue blood coaching job is really dead. They did some transfer portal case studies, and they even got sucked into the football excitement and did a football episode earlier this week, doing the work. Kathy and Coach continuing their season previews of all the Big Ten teams. They'll be talking about the IU women's basketball schedule release. And there's a new show, The Dribble Drive, with Austin Render, which is excellent. He covers Big Ten women's basketball. Just had Charlie Cream. I'm not exactly sure how he pronounces his last name, but he was on there. He's the bracketologist for women's college basketball. He's had a lot of big guests on. Folks around Indiana know how good Austin is, the great work he does. And so we're really excited to have him as part of the Back Home Network. So there's a ton of stuff going on. This is a great time, obviously, for Indiana sports. And we're trying to cover it as much as we can on the Back Home Network. So all those shows available anywhere that you listen to podcasts, available on our YouTube channel. And if you have trouble finding any of them, just shoot me an email and I will help you get subscribed and get set up. Okay. Andy, let's talk about the schedule. That was the big news today. We know the full non-conference schedule. We've known the breakdown of games and home and away for a while, but we hadn't seen them all kind of laid out in order and what that would look like. So why don't you run us through real quick, kind of your key takeaways from the schedule release today?
Yeah, so I tried to look just kind of from a strength of schedule standpoint. I could find 4 things that had predicted the order of finish. One was Torvik, obviously. Another, Eamon Brennan has sent out in 2 parts a Big Ten preview over the last couple weeks at Buzzer. So I took what he did. It seemed to be generally in the order that at least you could reasonably expect teams to finish. So I took the order that he put in there as his. Blue Ribbon has come out recently, and Lindy's had come out. So if you look, there's kind of a clear delineation as you get through like the top 9 and then into the bottom 9. So you're kind of consensus, top half of the league is some combination of Purdue, IU, Illinois, UCLA, Michigan State, Ohio State, Rutgers, who varied wildly in terms of what the different rankings were. Oregon, who I think most of them had in the top half, and then Michigan. And then there's a little bit of a gap before you get to Wisconsin, Maryland, and kind of on down from there. So I tried to look at it that way, just to split it up and kind of say, who does IU play their double plays against, and where do they rank? So double play wise, IU has Purdue, obviously, who is ranked number 1, Ohio State, who is ranked 6th, and Penn State, who is actually ranked last. So kind of a decent, the top, the bottom, and kind of a middle there. The home single plays are weighted pretty heavily toward the better teams in the league. There's only 3 home games against teams in the bottom half. And the inverse of that is the road schedule is largely against teams in the bottom of the league. They only have 1 road game against a team in the top 7 of the single plays, at least. They do have the road game against Purdue. So they got 10 games against the top half, 6 home, 4 road, 10 games against the bottom half, 4 home, 6 road. So, I think generally speaking, if you look at that, you've got, a schedule that is your tougher games. There's more of them at home than there are on the road. And in a league that where if you want to finish fairly high, you got to find ways to win road games. In theory, they've got some more winnable road games than maybe some other teams do. Haven't done this for all teams. So tough to say. The only thing I'll say about that to, kind of caveat that a little bit is if you look at the Torvik rankings, there's tons of teams that are really bunched up and really nobody who's outside of maybe the top 70-ish or something like that. So while you're looking at it and saying, well, you're playing more road games against the bottom of the league, that's relative. Are there really easy road games? I would say probably not. But if you look at it, and we can get into some of the key stretches, one thing I'll say, they do have a chance to get off to hopefully a good start. This is inclusive of the 2 December games, but 5 of the first 6 games are against teams ranked 13th or worst in that kind of composite that I did. The exception is Rutgers at home on January 2nd. So at least some opportunity to build some momentum, get off to a good start before you get into some of these tougher stretches as you go. So those were at least a couple of the big things, and then we can get into some of these key stretches that I know that a number of people have written about as well.
Yeah, Ryan, how excited are you for January 8th? I kind of feel like you should host that one solo.
Wait, is that the
It's
the
the USC game.
So
Mhm.
I don't really care about USC basketball. I never have since I left there.
Man,
Just-
not aboard the
Okay.
Must Bus. It would
Well,
seem.
no, not aboard the must. I mean, I think that he'll do good things there, but I'm not. Yeah. The team that everyone's overlooking when I look at that list, and I just put in the chat, is UCLA. People out here that I know and trust about basketball say they will be wildly overlooked and be very, very good this year. But it's, people who are observing this probably didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what's been going on there the last few years. They had a lot of injuries. They had a bunch of guys who left early before last year. So I think that's a team.
They're not super high in the computer rankings either.
No.
They're like in the low 20s.
And that seems like a lot of hangover from last year. And there is a lot of
Yeah.
that across, the nation, but you're seeing them ranked, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the rankings I've seen. And I know people out here who think they could easily win the conference. So, but I know you guys want to talk about the key stretch. I don't know if you want to move ahead to the key stretches, but there's one thing that stood out to me majorly, and
there's an obvious stretch.
Yeah, starting with January 5th, they play 7 of 11 on the road. That's the season right there. I feel like that stretch is the season, and obviously Atlantis will have a big deal. Depending on which games they get, will have a huge impact on their tournament life. But you go 7 of 11 on the road. And if they do well in that, they'll probably make the tournament. If they don't, it's going to be tough, I think, because that's a huge stretch for a team that hasn't played together a lot. It's not a lot of guys and they could come out of the gate with great chemistry, but that's early to have a tough test like that. And so it'll be fascinating to see how this team responds to that. And they haven't played really great on the road consistently. And that's not a Mike Woodson thing. That's going back a ways. So that'll be that. That's the stretch that stands out for me.
Yeah, and there's really
that early mid-January spot has been a place where we've really struggled too.
Yep,
like it's always kind of seemed like it's been a big lull there, and then we've had to kind of snap out of it. And so playing more of those games on the road, this team has the talent to meet any challenge. It's just, will they be ready and consistently, focused and ready to execute like they haven't always been the last 3 years,
and ready to go before late February, early March, as has not been the case.
Yeah, there's in that stretch, there's I guess 2 things about that stretch. First, the first game of those is they play Penn State at the Palestra, which will be interesting. Mike Weemuth has already reached out to me and said there is also an Eagles home game that day. I sincerely doubt that the times would work out well enough, but that would be a nice doubleheader for me if they do. But you have that stretch of 7 of 11, but within that, there's like a subset of that stretch where they play 4 of 5 on the road. They go to Ohio State, to Northwestern, home against Maryland.
2 places they've played great over the years.
Oh yeah, it gets better. It gets better. Then they go home against Maryland, and then the other 2 road games are at Purdue and at Wisconsin.
Oh God.
So that's kind of like the stretch within the stretch. To me, if you look back at that 7 of 11 is not great, but there's some on the periphery of that. There's some winnable games in there. It's that stretch of those 5 in the middle though that's really rough. Now that balances itself out as it kind of has to. Is they'll be home, I think, after. I'm trying to look at this here on the fly.
The last 6 are at home.
Yeah, but they play at Michigan State on the 11th of February. So they'll come home. They'll be home for that on the 12th. They're basically home for over 2 weeks there. Now they only have 3 games in that stretch where they play UCLA at home on Valentine's Day, Purdue at home 9 days later on the 23rd, where they've kind of got a bye there, and then they play home against Penn State as well on the 26th. So you've got a good stretch. Then they go to Washington, but at least you kind of got some time where you're not playing a lot of games, but you're also not traveling. So there's, I guess, a little reward for when you get through that stretch, assuming that everything is good. You can kind of catch your breath a little bit and then get ready for the stretch run. But yeah, their Pacific Northwest trip is the last trip of the season. And then they come home and finish things out with Ohio State on senior day.
Have they stated that they're going to just stay out there for stuff like that?
I have to think they would. The way the Big Ten scheduled it, they're basically making it so that that's easy to do.
It's a pair, yeah.
And it seemed like even
they're probably pairing the LA games, too, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So you either go to both the Northwest schools or you go to both the LA schools, but you don't go to both.
Okay.
Unless you're those teams, then I think they're all playing each other in more of a round robin. But so Yeah, I think, so there's some good and bad to that. It will definitely be a trial by fire as they go through that section. But like I said, at least there's a little bit of a reward on the back end where your late year schedule is loaded with home games. Plus you've just got a lot of time where you got a little bit of rest there. Now, probably could argue whether a 9-day layover is too much, would you just like it to be a week to recoup before that Purdue game? But we'll see how that goes.
I mean, that could come in handy just because towards the end of the Big Ten season, it seems like everybody's banged up. So to get that break later might, if they've been playing well and they've like kind of established themselves as like solidly in the tournament, it'll probably feel, this is a great time to get a break. If they're struggling or if they're on the fence, maybe that's not when you want that break. Maybe you want that break earlier. But I tend to think that this team will be doing pretty well. And so I think that might be a welcome break.
Yeah. The other thing that we always look at as soon as the schedule comes out is what date are we going to pick for our annual pilgrimage back to Bloomington? We always try and do a Big Ten game on a Saturday because that tends to work out better for those of us who have to fly in. And it looks like we're going to have two options, either the February, is that 8th or 9th?
They're both the February 8th or March 8th.
Yeah, against Michigan, or March 8th against Ohio State. So the second one would be Senior Day. The other one would be the day before the Super Bowl.
So problems with each.
Yeah.
You just
Big Ten. Yeah. Big Ten with the old FU to us by saying, good luck finding a time you can come because it ain't happening.
The Big Ten is just trying to get us to come and switch it to the fall. Like it's pay it football.
Yeah.
That's what you should do, a football weekend.
Yeah. So as soon as we figure out when that is going to be, we will let you know, but it'll probably be one of those two dates.
Are you guys
the other weekend-ish options are they have 4 Friday games. The only home one of those is on Valentine's Day, of course, against UCLA.
4 Friday games?
Yeah, 4 Friday games. There's 3 Sunday games as well. 2 of those are home. One's Maryland, one's Purdue. But I looked. I was doing this by day. The first 7 Big Ten games that IU has are all on different days of the week. So
the Friday thing I hate. I absolutely hate.
Yeah, there's 4 of them. It's
Friday
crazy.
night basketball games. Nobody nationally is watching basketball on Fridays.
Well, the funny thing is one of them's the Purdue game at Mackey. So
they're really trying to make Friday night watching college sports a thing. They really are, and they're failing miserably. So maybe they stopped doing it after this year, but 4 Friday home game or 4 Friday games.
Yeah, 4 Friday games, 3 on the road, only 1 at home. But yeah,
wow.
Yeah, and we don't know tip times or TV designations, anything like that. That kind of trickles out. I think over the next few weeks. Some are TBA until later.
As we're sitting here, I mean, I know we can't make any announcements or anything like that, but it's probably looking like February is a better spot for us, right?
More than likely,
probably.
I would say.
Yeah, because Senior Day is did we do Senior Day once?
We did
the Ohio State Senior Day. Lost.
It was a Friday night, so we didn't do.
Yeah, so we're not welcome there for Senior Day for a lot of reasons.
And that was not when we did. And just doing a show after Senior Day would be tough anyway.
We didn't. We waited and did it at Galen's the next day.
Yeah. Like it's just that's tough. So those are our 2. Thank you, Big Ten. We appreciate you.
Really outdone yourselves with this.
Ryan has to work from a hotel for 12 hours on Sunday. Then I guess.
Yeah. So, everybody's favorite part of the show: podcasters complaining about
how difficult life is.
Yeah. That's right. About
guys, we have a tough job. This is a tough job. Just remember that.
Such is the life they picked.
That's right. Such is the life that we picked. Okay. Any other hot takes about the schedule before we move on, gentlemen?
I mean, I'll say that I think that IU has had a really tough schedule as far as the teams they've gotten. Maybe the last 3 years. I think this seems a lot more even, and maybe it's just that there's more teams and more balance to go around. But it just seems like this is a much more balanced schedule for IU. Now, that road stretch sucks, but other than that, it seems like a pretty balanced schedule.
And this is one of those things like Galen tweeted out earlier. I mean, it's fun to talk about right now because there's not a whole lot else to talk about, but you don't know. There's going to be injuries and teams peaking at the right time and
teams coming out of nowhere.
So a lot of the stuff that's said now, it's kind of what you project based on what we know. But as we start to get more answers about these teams and figure out what happens on a week by week basis, all this stuff is going to change. So, or some of it's going to change.
Yeah, there's just so much turnover. You've got new coaches, you've got 4 new teams, you've got whatever, but all the, but you have what you have at your disposal to kind of at least try to assess right now what it is. But that stuff will all change quite a bit. And we've already talked about the non-conference schedule. The other thing that always comes up is like the early 2 Big Ten games that are in December. Just so people know, home game is against Minnesota, which is on a Monday, I believe. And then that Friday, they play at Nebraska. So first road game that they'll have of the season will come at Nebraska, a place that hasn't been all that kind to IU lately either.
Tominaga's gone.
I do think you look a little bit at some of that. And like most years, Nebraska is bringing together a lot of pieces. And so maybe it's good to play them early as you're doing that. IU obviously bringing in a lot of pieces too. So maybe that evens itself out, but that'll be the first true road game of the season at Nebraska on the 13th of December. So I talked about earlier that if you look at the rankings, the teams that IU plays early in the Big Ten are generally not ones at the top. So an opportunity at least to get out to a potentially good start if they can perform well at Nebraska. Certainly the Minnesota one at home is one they should expect to win.
Yep. All righty. Well, coming up here on Assembly Call Radio, Wednesday was Media Day in Bloomington. So we're going to react to some of the comments from Mike Woodson, from the IU players. What did we hear? What are we buying into? What are we going to take a wait and see approach with? We will talk about all that. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right. Well, hello there to everybody who's watching live. Awesome to see you here. We appreciate you, being here after a 3-week hiatus, and we're doing this at a different time. We didn't really, announce it officially until the day before. So we always appreciate those of you who are here live. And gosh, we especially appreciate Ricky here in the chat, who sent us a super chat with a little donation. Look at that. We very much appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's awesome.
Thank you, Ricky.
Yeah. So if you have a question later for segment 3,
I don't know what we did to deserve that, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it came right at the time we were complaining about how hard it is for the Friday show. So
we should do that.
Maybe Ricky felt sorry for you, Ryan, and decided to
may not want to encourage that behavior, but do what you want.
Look, I'm doing calculations in my head right now of how many more times I'd have to complain to pay for my plane ticket to Bloomington. But
yes. All right. Are we ready let's just dive into segment 2 if you guys are ready. And I put some takeaways on here, but obviously if you guys have others, then we can.
Yeah, I think you hit most of the ones that kind of stood out to me. I did not listen to any of the player stuff. I went back and listened to Woodson, but I read some.
Yeah, I didn't listen to a ton of the player stuff either.
People wrote about the players. Some of those are hard to hear. I feel like that I've spent time in the past like looking over them, and then you don't really get very much because you can't quite make a whole lot out of it. So,
yeah,
but we'll see.
Awesome.
Okay.
Jared, you ready?
Yep. Let's do it.
All right.
What's going on? It's Christian Wofford. What's the only thing better than an epic buzzer beater? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join my guys Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the Assembly Call after every IU game. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you, Christian. I am Jared Morris. I am here with Ryan Phillips and Andy Bottoms. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Very excited to be here with you for this off-season episode. And this second segment is sponsored by our friends at Hoosier Ticket Project, where they help families experience IU sporting events in person for the first time to help create meaningful moments. We love supporting Hoosier Ticket Project and what they're doing there. HoosierTicketProject.org is the website. And we have a little something fun that we are doing. I texted Josh earlier today to see if they had some tickets that we might be able to use for some kind of giveaway or trivia question so we can help pack the rock on Saturday. I know Coach is going to be there. I can't be there, but want to help do whatever I can to get more butts in seats. Because if I was anywhere in driving distance, I would definitely try to be there. So we have a trivia question. And this trivia question is going to be for 4 tickets to the Charlotte game. All right. So whoever answers this trivia question first, you can send an email to jared@assemblycall.com. The first one with the earliest timestamp with the correct answer will win. So don't just put it in the chat. You've got to actually email me, jared@assemblycall.com. This gives a little bit of a head start to our people who are here live. But if you're listening on the podcast, it's not the easiest question. So there may still be an opportunity for you. And plus, whoever answers it right has to also need the tickets. So what I'm saying is definitely try to answer. But here's the question, and I was thinking about this after Indiana went out to LA and beat UCLA, which, even though Indiana had played pretty well against FIU and obviously demolished Western Illinois, this was really the game where it kind of felt like, okay, a lot of fans started to buy in. Like, all right, Cignetti has really got something going here. This is something to believe in. This is really something different. And so I asked my dad, for those of you who don't know, my dad was on Bill Mallory's staff. He was here from 1984 until 1993. And obviously that 1984 season went drastically different from how this one is because they went 0-11 that year, but they were building something. And so I asked him, what game was it from his early time at IU under Coach Mallory that felt like the UCLA game in terms of rallying everyone to believe in what they were doing? And I wanted to know, and I had a good idea because I've talked to him about this before. What game would he pick? And he kind of took it from the perspective of what game really got the players to buy in, like he felt, to what they were doing. Because, it was a little bit harder to gauge, it's not like he could go on Twitter and gauge all the fan support back then. So what game was it? And I'm not even going to tell you what season it was from, but from those early years under Mallory, when obviously things were different, very different from how they've been at IU. But what was the first game under Bill Mallory when it really felt like the players and even the fans started to believe in what they were doing? It's a game. So let me know the game and the year. Email me, jared@assemblycall.com. The first one with the correct answer, timestamped, will get 4 tickets to the Charlotte game. So we'll coordinate how to get you those tickets from our friends at HoosierTicketProject.org. So yeah, let me know your answer to that question. All right, guys. Media Day. This week, they already had Big Ten. No, they haven't done Big Ten Media Day, but this was Institutional Media Day, where the local press was able to get together, have a press conference with Mike Woodson. The women's basketball team also did this, so they'll be talking about this on our women's basketball shows on the Back Home Network. But we got a nice press conference with Mike Woodson, some time with the players. We weren't there, but we always appreciate the efforts of, Zach Osterman and the Indy Star folks, Alex Bozich, Mike at Daily Hoosier, like all those guys that are out there. Rob Johns and the Pigs guys, all those guys who are actually there getting us this information so that we can talk about it since we're not there. But I'm curious, I wrote some stuff down on our run sheet in terms of takeaways, but Ryan, I'll start with you and then go to you, Andy. What was your number one takeaway just from Media Day? And we've obviously seen a lot of these, and a lot of it's just talk. It's just October talk. They haven't even started practice yet, so you never want to buy into it too much. But I'm curious, Ryan, what stood out to you the most from reading and watching the comments?
Mbako taking a leap. I think that was the first thing that stood out to me. Just, if that guy can be sort of what he was advertised, being an inside-out threat, maybe a better three-point shooter and somebody who can run the floor and attack on his own more. It was early on in the season last year. It didn't look like he could attack off the dribble. He probably could have. He just didn't have the confidence. And so that him taking that next step as an attacking offensive player is going to be really key to what Indiana does this year. I think that he, ceiling-wise, has the highest ceiling of anybody on the team. And so him being a guy who can go and get points and play like an all Big Ten player, that's going to be one of the biggest keys, especially at that wing spot. It's felt like for a long time, Indiana has had guards and centers, but they haven't had that sort of like wing attacking, scoring, shooting, like a do everything kind of big wing. And so that if he can fill that role, that's huge in modern basketball. And so, you've got a center in Ballo, you've got the guards, you would assume, in Rice and Carlisle, they got to learn how to play together and all that. But having that guy off the wing to be able to go get buckets is enormous. So if he took the leap and he really is who he can be, I think that's enormous for Indiana.
Yeah, no, that stood out a lot to me. And I've, had this discussion. I don't know if we've had the discussion on the show yet. Maybe we'll do it in October, kind of talk about, on what we think is going to be a very balanced scoring team, who's going to lead this team in scoring. And Baco is the guy I think is going to lead us in scoring. And I think it'll be in our best interest if it's him.
Yeah.
And so if he's able to take that leap and, be a 40+% 3-point shooter, but also get to the free throw line and show some of the driving that we saw last year and combine it with competent defense, I mean, you've got an all-conference player right there. So I was encouraged by that as well.
I wouldn't be surprised if he leads the team in scoring but doesn't take the most shots. That would be because I think some of the guards are going to take a lot of shots because that's a lot of Woodson's offense is late clock pick and roll, pull up, that kind of stuff. So
but he'll probably have the highest true shooting percentage because of the 3-point shooting and the free throws.
I would agree with that. That's why. Yeah. And so I think that it would be, again, I'm not predicting this. I'm just saying I could see a scenario where he leads the team in scoring, but isn't the one who takes the most shots.
Yep. All right, Andy, what stood out the most to you?
Well, I think just this is not the thing I was going to say, but I think to piggyback on that with Mbako a little bit, some of the unlock with him is getting him to play the 4 a little bit more. And Woodson talked about that. And really, I think I'm trying to remember back to last year of, how much of that was definitely something that was brought up, but he never really, likely because of the personnel, embraced that as something that would really happen. And we didn't see it in large part until some places at the end of the season. And so I think that helps unlock him a little bit more. And I think there's a more reasonable path to that this year. When you look at the amount of minutes that Ballo has gotten over the course of his college career, you're going to have times where you need to, you are not going to be able to play 2 bigs in the same way that we've seen the last couple of years. So I do think it's potentially more feasible for him to do that with Mbako. Whether we think he could have or should have last year, we don't know, but I think there's a pretty easy scenario to lay out that allows him to play at least some of his minutes there. And he showed the ability to rebound well in stretches last year. So I think that's a positive. For me, outside of the Mbako stuff, the biggest takeaway was a lot of the guard conversation and the speed element of what he's expecting from Rice and Carlisle and how those guys are going to be able to play together, open up some things for other guys and be able to share that word. Talked about pushing the pace. I think Alex Bozich was funny. He had Adam Jardy on talking about Ohio State, and he's like, every Big Ten team says they want to push the pace in December, and then it gets into January, and that doesn't happen. So that is not a thing that is unique to IU. There's lots of times
Didn't Jordan Sperber used to put together a
that
video
was another one. Yeah,
coach?
All the new coaches where there was culture was
push
the one
the pace.
year, and then push the pace was whatever. Yeah. So I think everybody says they want to do that. I think anyone from IU to everywhere else can take that with a grain of salt. But I do think if they want to do that, they have the personnel. He talked about them kind of in comparison to X really being one of the only guys who was, really fast with the ball in that scenario. That just wasn't who Hood-Schifino was when he was here. Had a lot of other skills, but pushing the ball was not necessarily what his strong suit was. So, we talk about the guard play and how critical that is. And those guys, if they really can, be the instigators of what they want to do on offense and initiate things that way and get into things quickly, I think they could give this team a different look than what we've really had the personnel to see over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Obviously a lot of people, kind of glommed on to Mike Woodson saying he wants to play smaller, and he specifically called out Mbako and Luke Goody as guys that he wants to get time at the 4. And, we've heard that at different times, and it hasn't really happened. And Coach Woodson kind of defaults to what he's comfortable with, which is playing the 2 bigs. And, the 2 bigs have often been the most efficient scorers on the team, but it does seem like now we're going to have a little bit more balance. But to put some numbers to what you said, Andy, I think part of it is how is the roster constructed? And, is that going to kind of lead to playing a little bit smaller? And I think by necessity it will this year, because, you think back last year, I mean, especially late in the season, Khalil Ware was playing a lot of minutes, and Umar Ballo is not the guy who's going to do that. I mean, he played 2 seasons ago, he played 68% of minutes. Last year, he played 63.7% of minutes. Khalil Ware played, 73.4% of minutes in conference games. And I think it was, a little bit higher there toward the end. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but over the course of time, it is. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say Woodson also plays his starters more than most guys do. I mean, he's willing to throw a guy out there for 38 minutes where most coaches conserve him to the end of games. It's again, we've talked about the NBA mindset. Hopefully that's shifting the longer he's in college, but that's been a trait of his, since he got here, was to play his starters more, use the bench less. And part of that is his bench hasn't been that good. And so maybe it's out of necessity, but so he may play more minutes this year.
Now, okay, so that's an interesting point here, because I think from a bench perspective, I think our backcourt and wing depth is much better.
Yes.
But the biggest question I have about this roster is the depth behind Malik Renew and Oumar Ballo, as in terms of a traditional five. I mean, I think, Langdon Hatton is a versatile guy and has done some things, but he hasn't done anything at this level. And Dallas James, projects as more of a depth piece. I don't think you're expecting him to play a lot of meaningful minutes in Big Ten play. And so you've got Ballo, who is by all accounts one of the best bigs in America, hyper efficient, but hasn't always had the conditioning to play super big minutes. And Malik Renew has had issues with both conditioning and foul trouble, less with conditioning as he's gotten older, but the foul trouble is still there. And especially if he's going to be playing some four, early in games, if they start Mbako, Renew, and Ware, or Mbako, Renew, and Ballo. So what I mean by that is I just think by the nature of how they play and the types of players they are, you're just not going to have Ballo and Renew on the court quite as much. And if they're off the court, the most obvious guy to come in isn't Hatton. I mean, it's sliding either Renew or Ballo down to the five and then playing, sliding Mbako or Goody to the four. And so I think just out of necessity, based on the roster, even if you don't trust Mike Woodson's intentions, I think his hand's going to be forced at certain times to do it, because he's not going to go out of his top 8 or 9 in Big Ten games to force in a too big lineup. Like last year, I don't think either one of those guys even projects where Peyton Sparks was, to where, when Ware was out against Wisconsin, Sparks started the game. I don't think Hatton's going to be starting. I think you would just go with Mbako at the 4 and play a little bit smaller. And so just by virtue of the roster, I feel a little bit more comfortable that we'll see more of that this year.
Yeah. I think that's why I said what I said. I think you can pretty easily see the path to that happening.
Yeah.
Last year, realistically, given what you'd gotten from most of the bench guys, you really couldn't afford to. The drop off that you would have seen taking, kind of moving away from, playing Ware as much would have been too substantial to really stomach. But yeah, I think both because of roster construction and what you've seen from Ballo, maybe they can get him in a different place conditioning wise to play a few more minutes, but it's not going to increase by 50% to where he's being able to play almost the whole game. That just is not the reality of the situation. So, so I think it's pretty easier than in the prior couple of years to figure out, okay, yeah, this makes sense. And this is a more potential reality than not. So I think that part's exciting. I think that's one of the things as you look at these, that it's like, okay, I may not need to see that to totally believe it, because I can make a pretty easy argument in my head to figure out how and why that would happen.
Yeah. A couple other things that stood out. We got a little bit of insight, I guess, into kind of injury and availability. It was interesting. Mike Woodson said with Ja'Kai Newton, that he's not able to practice consistently. He's able to do some things, but not every day. When they talked to Ja'Kai, he said he's 100%. Now, he may have just been kind of talking about how he's feeling that day, or, who knows? So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. We still don't have a whole lot of clarity on how ready he'll be for the season. Trey Galloway, it sounds like he's still rehabbing from his meniscus injury. And, they're hoping to have him ready to go at the beginning of the season, but he's not doing full 5-on-5 stuff yet. Again, fortunately, there's some depth there. Where you've got Miles Rice, you've got Kanan Carlisle, you've got Gabe Cupps, who got some big time minutes. Obviously, you'd like to have Trey, you'd like to have Ja'Kai there as a depth piece. But finally, we have a little bit of depth at guard, although knock on wood, because if 2 of them are already hurt, based on the recent history.
Yay.
So we need to keep our eye out on that. Mike Woodson did talk about Malik Renew playing out on the floor more, as he's going to have to if he's teaming up with Oumar Ballo. This is not playing with Khalil Ware, who can step out, shoot threes, do a little bit more away from the basket. If you're playing Oumar Ballo, he'll go set some screens and can operate in the pick and roll, but he's going to score on the block. And so, Malik Renew is obviously going to have to be more consistent. We saw flashes of it from him away from the basket, especially as a shooter, but a lot of questionable decisions as a driver and a passer. And so, obviously they're working on that, and especially defensively, where just defending without fouling against quicker guys is going to be very, very important. And then I thought it was interesting, Woodson kind of alluded, Ryan, to some intentional team building stuff, this offseason, and really getting the guys together, which I think is smart for a number of reasons. One just being, it didn't feel for a lot of last year like it was a real together team, although they came together at the end, to their credit. Those last 5 games, it really did feel like a cohesive unit. But it seems like they wanted to get a head start on that. And I think that's essential when you have transient rosters like this and so many different guys, and not just guys going from high school to college, but guys coming from different programs with different expectations of what college basketball is going to be like. And so having those guys on campus, getting them together, having some of that team building, that's really important, because you can't spend November and December working that stuff out. If you have designs on doing big things, you have to hit the ground running. It remains my biggest question about this team and how the season's going to go, because you can't, it's not the NBA where you can ease into it. Like, this team's got to hit the ground running, not just winning, but winning efficiently given its schedule. And so I was happy to hear that it has to have been a focus if Woody's going to talk about it. And so I was really pleased to hear that. And hopefully we see that, out on the court when they play.
Yeah, and you said it. I mean, this team can't afford to do what last year's team did and just learn how to play together on the fly and learn each other on the fly. That's how you miss the NCAA tournament, by your early performances. And I think this team has a big test early in Atlantis, and they have to be hitting on all their cylinders by then, because those games are going to be wildly important to their either their tournament hopes or their tournament seeding. When it comes to maybe getting a protected seed if you play well. They, last year, you're right, it felt like those guys had just met each other when the season tipped off. And it's not true, but maybe these kind of team building things should have been prioritized last year as well. And maybe we don't know if they did things last year or what, but the fact that they're talking about it this year means they realized we got to get these guys on the same page faster than we did last year. And they have to hit the ground running. Now, talent is not going to be the issue with this team. And how the pieces fit together on paper is not going to be the issue with this team. They've got all the pieces in the right places. Yeah, as you mentioned, maybe not enough depth in the front court as much as we would like. But as far as just raw talent at the right positions to win basketball games, how they're going to be deployed, we don't know, and all that stuff. But just from a pure talent perspective, now you've got to make sure those pieces work together. And half of that is your system, and the other half is making them work together, like fit together and like sharing the ball, like playing with each other, have chemistry, all of those things. And that doesn't just happen. Some guys have it naturally, but it's very rare. And usually it's like 2 guys out of 10 have that. You got to make it so these guys know each other, like each other, want to play, and most importantly, want to win together. And aren't just looking at their own stuff, aren't just looking at their own future, but they want to win together and move this forward. And it's smart to do that. We'll see if it worked. I mean, we don't know. You can do as much stuff. You have as many pool parties as you want, as many barbecues as you want, and spend as much time together as you want. But it's whether that develops into something on the floor, we won't know until a couple games in, probably. And but I appreciate that they prioritize that, because it is wildly important in modern college basketball with all of the transfers, the last minute commitment, recruitments and commitments and all of that stuff, where these guys don't have a chance to build chemistry over the course of a year. And you're resetting your roster in some cases every year. You need to do stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's wildly important. I think it's really smart that they prioritized it, and we'll see if it works.
And I think a big part of that will be, one, how good is Miles Rice right off the bat? The guard play was so inconsistent last year. It was hard for anybody to get into a rhythm. And so that's big. And then how solid are they defensively? Because there were glaring defensive issues as soon as the exhibition games. And those lasted for months. And so just, can they be a little bit more solid with a lot of new pieces in there defensively? Because that's part of what can hurt you early in the season, especially with the way Indiana plays defense, is if you're giving up some threes and teams start to get comfortable, it's that same old problem that we've just seen year after year because of, especially the way that we've chosen to play defense. So I think those two things early in the season are going to be critical.
Yep.
Anyway, Andy, I know you had some other stuff.
Well, just to finish up on that, one of the things that Woodson did talk about was that it seemed like kind of in contrast to what he talked about, particularly when he came in, he said they had really just more recently started to focus a lot on things defensively, and he'd seen a lot of improvement in that area, at least in practices and things like that. So interesting to kind of see that different approach maybe of what that looks like. But I would agree with you. And I think to talk through the team building component, I know Galen mentioned this during the conversation with Rhett Lewis. I think he mentioned another one of the Crimson Cast this week, but they've got all these guys at receiver who are stepping in from different places, and to have Donovan McCulley, who was a huge get for them to keep, after he went in the portal, be a guy who got hurt in the first game. So understandably, hasn't played as much, but largely hasn't been a huge part of things as he's worked his way back from that injury. But seeing the excitement that he had and kind of that camaraderie that group has built in a very similar situation, actually probably even more so, with all the transfers that they brought in. I think the ability in modern college sports, no matter what sport it is, to be able to build that kind of chemistry and for everybody to be more excited about winning than they are about their own performance and statistics is going to be pretty critical for this team in the same way that it has for the football team. And it's easy to be excited about it from a football perspective right now because they haven't really faced a lot of adversity. The same thing is going to hold true from a basketball standpoint. Everybody's going to say the chemistry is great until it's not, right? So then you got to figure things out from there. But the other two things that kind of stood out to me in smaller ways than the other things we talked about. One, the comments that Mike Woodson made about Gabe Cupps and how he's basically going to force the coach to play him based on his work ethic and all things like that. I think that, I've really enjoyed the Players Perspective podcast that Miller Kopp has been doing with some of the players. He had Brian Walsh on this week, which I thought was really interesting from a coaching perspective. But the Cupps one, just kind of talking through the work ethic and kind of how he is about things and his reflection on his freshman season where he got to play a ton and learn a lot. I think he was a guy who would be pretty easy to look and say his minutes are going to go down dramatically, and they're going to go down. I don't think there's any question about that, barring an injury, but I think they will not go down to the extent that perhaps people would expect them to, based on some of Woodson's comments. And the other was, I said, I think between segments, I didn't get to listen to a lot of what the players said, but I did read something where they interviewed Ballo and talked a little bit about why he came here and some of the different things like that. And one of the things he mentioned was Khalil Ware. And he was like, I played against this guy, and what they did with him in 9 months, he was a completely different player than the guy that I played against.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
It's one thing for him to go to the NBA. That's obviously the ultimate testimony to what they were able to do with him, but thought it was really cool to hear from another player and how much of a factor that likely was. We don't have to pretend that money wasn't also a factor for Umar Ballo, but
he wasn't cheap.
But for him to be able to step back and kind of say, hey, look, I could have my pick of wherever I wanted to go. And clearly what they'd been able to do with Ballo was, or with Ware was impressive to him, and a guy that looking at a guy that he played against. So I thought those were a couple of interesting anecdotes from some of the comments that I read.
By the way, just to piggyback on something Andy said, when was the last time somebody said, I wish Indiana basketball would be more like Indiana football? It's
just strange times we're living in, man.
These are weird times, man.
Everything is upside down, inside out.
This is weird. It's odd.
I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. Well, look, I mean, it's all talk right now, but it's always nice to at least hear some of the talk that you hope to hear. And I think there's enough there for Indiana fans to look at and say, okay, if some of these things, can come through, you don't have to squint too hard to see a really good Indiana basketball team. I think obviously with the backdrop of last season, that adds some context that has everybody a little bit wary, maybe keeping things at arm's length. But look, we've learned a lot about, kind of teams early in seasons and how those seasons are going to go. And so I think how the first few weeks goes leading into Atlantis is going to tell us a lot about how this season is. So We will just have to wait and see, but it's coming closer, September 19th, and we've only got about 6 weeks left until their actual games. All righty. Coming up here on the Assembly Call, we are going to talk a little football. It's not something that we do a lot, but I think the start to this season kind of warrants it. And so we'll talk a little Indiana football, and we're also going to react to the recent news that Tennessee football is adding a talent tax to their season ticket package. What does that mean? Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. By the way, I have to sound the emergency klaxon. I just saw Alex Bozich from Inside the Hall tweeted, the Big Ten schedules are now loaded on Bart Torvik, and the current projections are up. What is Indiana's current Big Ten winning or record in Big Ten games according to Bart Torvik? And remember, is a Wisconsin fan, so always amazingly biased against Indiana. Just kidding.
I tell you, I mean, if you look at his stuff, there's so many teams that are so close together. Like any home road, all those like kind of toss up games are going to go to the road team. Bart though will be on the NCAA team sheets this year. He's
as he should be.
Yeah, they Sagarin basically retired and or stopped doing what he was doing last year, so they went down from 5 to 4, and Torvik is the backfill. So congrats to him.
Yeah. What do you guess
is on the record?
Andy first.
What's that?
Any guesses on what the projected Big Ten record is?
Oh, I already saw it. So
you saw it. Okay.
I saw somebody tweet about it earlier.
I have no idea. So let's not.
11-9.
11-9.
But as Andy said, I mean,
yeah, there's so many
teams all bunched up. There's probably like 16 teams between 12 wins and and 9 wins.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked enough at whatever.
I would have said at least
schedule
13,
is, but
yeah,
but the way he's got him ranked, I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense.
I'm trying to find what I have. Like, there's a ton of
the way his algorithm has him ranked. To be clear,
yeah, right. But like he's got. If I'm looking at this, you got Purdue, Michigan State, Rutgers, like 16, 17, 18. Illinois is 20. Then you've got between 29 and 50. There's probably close to 10 Big Ten teams, I would guess.
Yeah, I counted that earlier today. There's 11, I think. It's wild.
Yeah. So 10 or 11. So you get into those, and then it's basically like, well, if you think that's where they're ranked that closely, and you adjust for who the home team is and the road team is, you're going to lose you're going to end up with a lot of losses in that regard. So even though the schedule is, and that was kind of why I said what I said earlier, like you can say when you look at these, like, oh, it's the bottom part of the league. I don't know that anybody in the league is going to be absolutely awful. I mean, if you look, Penn State is pretty universally picked to be last. They've still got Ace Baldwin somehow. And some of the guys that were on their team, he returned a decent amount. Other guys that were there last year as well. I think he's a good coach. Like, they're not going to be a walkover for anybody. Don't need to tell IU fans that by any stretch. But even Minnesota was relatively impressive. Now that poor guy is like, Dawson Garcia stayed, everybody else left, and then he's trying to figure out what to do around that. So, but I think he's proven himself to be a pretty good coach. So, like, there just aren't a lot of gimmies, and so when you've got everybody pretty bunched together, I think you're going to have tons of teams with a near 500 record.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Torvik's 2025 projections right now. He's got Indiana at 29th, which if you're the 29th best team in the country, you're like what, a 9 seed or an 8 seed? 7 seed.
No, you'd be
something like that.
You'd be the first 8.
Yeah. So, I mean, Ryan, is there any world? And I think most Indiana fans, again, a lot of Indiana fans, kind of keeping this thing at arm's length. But most in an optimistic scenario, or even hey, here's what I expect if I'm going to be happy about this season, are thinking better than 29th and 19 and 10. I mean, is there any world, Ryan, where that result would be considered satisfactory for this season?
Absolutely. I mean, have you seen what they're spending on this roster? Absolutely.
No, I know. I'm aware. It was a rhetorical question. Really.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely not. And by the way, there's a lot of money people who wouldn't be excited about that either, because they've spent a lot of money on this roster. We're going to be reiterating,
and this roster should be better than that.
Honestly. It should.
I mean,
this should be a top 15 team. I mean, on paper, top 15 team, no question, competing for a Big Ten title. no question. And it should make the Sweet 16. I know that we always say tournament's a crapshoot. You do all your work before that, and then hopefully you get a path that works for you. But it should be a Sweet 16 team. I mean, and if it isn't, I mean, there are going to be questions that need to be answered, not from us, but from the people who paid for it. I mean, they're going to ask questions, and I'm optimistic about how this is going to go. I really am, and I think that the talent on the floor, I think a lot of the kids have the right attitude. I think that it's hearing that quote from Ballo about just wanting to get better, like coming to Indiana to get better. Now, obviously, money's not bad, but he could have gotten that money probably anywhere, and at any of the big schools. But having the right attitude is just as important as having the right talent. And so having both of those, what seems like both of those, everyone's saying the right things. This team should be better than that.
Yeah, and I think, if you're saying, okay, well, why do you think they'll be better than 29th? I mean, these are the best projections. To me, it comes down to two things. You've got experienced guys in Renew, in Ballo, in Galloway, who you pretty much know what you're going to get. You're not expecting big leaps from them. But I think you've got really big ceilings with Rice, Carlisle, and Mbako. And if they can hit, if each of those three guys can hit, 75% or higher on what you would expect from a freshman to sophomore jump from guys of their talent level, given their talent level and already what they've shown, they can really take this team to the next level. That's where my optimism comes from, because they're going to do it at positions where Indiana's really needed it, because Indiana's already proven they can put together good post scoring. I mean, we're going to have that with Renew and Ballo. May not always be pretty, but it's going to be rock solid. And so if those guys on the wing and in the backcourt can take freshman to sophomore leaps like we've seen, that's where, there's potentially big, a big ceiling for what this team could do. And I think, we're all hoping that for once Indiana can get toward its ceiling, because it just feels like forever we just kind of putt around. And by the end of the season, we're just hoping to kind of get back to what was, kind of the base expectation. So anyway, let's move on. Segment 3. You guys ready?
Let's do it.
Cool.
This is Jordan Halls, and I never miss a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
Thank you, Jordan. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, and producer Eddie on the controls. Very excited to have him here with us for his first show. Guys, normally here in segment 3, we do our mailbag segment, but we're going to swerve just a little bit and just spend a few minutes talking about IU football, because it's fun talking about IU football when the Hoosiers are winning. Indiana 3-0 here early in the Curt Cignetti era. And as he told Don Fisher today during his coach's show, if they win on Saturday against Charlotte, he will be the first Indiana coach ever to start out 4-0, which is excellent. I think we all expect that. Andy, my favorite part about that was seeing him, talk about Charlotte and basically saying, I know it sounded like I may need to go back and listen to the show. I was piecing this together from tweets, but it almost sounded like he was maybe worried that his team wasn't taking Charlotte quite as seriously as they needed to. And I was basically saying, like, hey, we're going to be their Super Bowl. They're going to come in here, give us their best shot. And it was just really nice to hear an Indiana football coach talking with that level of confidence. Like, we're somebody's Super Bowl. Like, we're usually the team that's like trying to give someone else our best shot. And just to have him talking like that, it's what I love about him, is that he is absolutely undaunted by Indiana's history and reputation and any of that. Like, he is just Curt Cignetti University, barnstorming around the country, building ass-kicking football teams no matter where he goes. And he's just going to do his thing independent of where he is, what the reputation is, and anything. And you better get on board, because he's going to do it. And a school like Indiana, that's what we needed. And he's kind of got everybody on board. It's early. We'll see. This is another opportunity to build that momentum before the Maryland game. But it continues to be jarring in the most pleasant of ways to hear him talk about Indiana football, because we just haven't had that in a long, long time.
Look, I'll say this about Curt. I love. Sorry, I'm going to call him Coach Cignetti. I think that I love what he's doing. He's a little touched, though. He's a little crazy. But remember what we said when they were looking for a football coach. We said it on this podcast. You get one of 3 guys in Indiana. You get a guy who probably doesn't have a very high ceiling. And
Jared DiNardo.
Kind of. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. You can get a young guy on the way up who's going to leave. If he does really well, is going to leave after like 3 years. Sort of like if IU would hire Carolyn DeBoer, or something like that. Yeah. Or you're going to get a guy who's a little crazy and thinks he can do it in Indiana. Like I mean compete for Big Ten titles and maybe a national championship. They got the third guy. Like he's a little crazy in all the right ways for a football coach, we hope. But that's what they got. And that's one of those are the only three guys you can get at Indiana. And I think the third one has the highest upside long term. And that's what they went with. I mean, the guy walked on the floor and said Michigan and Ohio State sucked at a basketball game. And
he's right about the first one.
There you go. Well, let's see what USC does this weekend before we make that designation, just because I'm worried about their long-term prospects. But, you're right, Jared. But
it does suck.
But, I mean, who does that? Who calls down the thunder? Who talks about a program like Indiana being somebody's Super Bowl? A couple years ago, they were losing to teams like that. So I love it. I love it so much. At the same time, you're kind of like, Kurt, just one level down for right now. Next year, do the rest. No, I know.
Turn a level up. No way.
I'm teasing. This is somebody who's been rooting for Indiana football for a long time and is used to disappointment. So, I was texting with my buddies, and one of my friends went to UCLA, and we were texting, and when they actually were pulling away in the fourth quarter, the group chat has 2 Indiana alums and a UCLA alum, and we're texting with each other. And we're the 2 Indiana alums are shocked this is how this is playing out. And he's like, why? UCLA is terrible. It's years of Indiana crapping the bed is why we're shocked by this. And It's true. I mean, you're not used to this. And I don't know. I like it so far.
Yeah, I think what stands out, I mean, there's lots of things that stand out to me. But there's just a level of preparedness and even though he might be a little bit crazy, the kind of poise and the expectation of this is how we're going to do things, and refusing to make excuses and refusing to settle for less than the expectation that he had. I mean, these interviews when he's going in, which unfortunately are always timed after they've, their main bugaboo thus far has been giving up points on the last drive of the half, which basically sets him up to seem like a crazy person going into the locker room because he's so pissed that they have, had this letdown and done this. And it's, but again, I think that's what stands out. There's no excuse making. There's a level of accountability and things in place that we just haven't seen for a while. And there's no resting on your laurels of hey, look, if we've done 20 things this half and 19 of them have been good, he only cares about the one that wasn't. And that may over the course of time drive you crazy as a coach. But I think for this program, that's what it needs. He's not letting anybody off the hook. It's the level of expectation and just the little things. I know we were texting during the game the other day, some of these blitz pickups by these running backs would not have happened in prior years and are the reason that IU has not had a starting quarterback get through a full season in forever. And I saw a couple of people even tweeting out some clips of them today. They're getting to the right spot and they just look prepared for what's happening and not phased when things don't go their way. And I, like every other IU fan, sat here watching the game, and for as good as it looked the other day, it's 21 to 3. Was that what it was at one point? Yeah. I think. And then it was or maybe it was 7. I think it was 21-7. Anyway, I think it was 21-7. And in my head, I'm going, well, UCLA has the ball. They're going to score a touchdown here. They get the ball first in the second half. And this game is going to be tied before we even know what happened. And it's shame on me, I guess, for not believing, but I'm sure I was not alone in thinking that way, and he just refuses to allow himself to think that way. And I think it takes time to get everybody to turn the corner. Yeah, it was 21-7, and my exact thought was, well, they give up a touchdown here, then they give up a touchdown to start the half, and then it'll be tied, and then who knows what happens from there. And they held them to a field goal, came out, got the ball back to start the second, early in the second half, and pretty much controlled things from there. So there's a lot of a lot of scars to get
It's gonna
past
take some time to break that all
IU
up.
fans to not have that be my conditioned reaction, but I look forward to it. I am excited about it, and I'll try to do better as we go in the future. But I think that's about as telling as it gets for me. It's just that the ability to do the little things right and to not let things spiral and get away from you quickly is a welcome change.
Yeah, I'll say this about Cignetti. He doesn't just expect to win. He expects to play to a certain level of their ability. And anything less than that, regardless of the outcome, is unacceptable. And you're talking about accountability, and that's what the accountability is. We are going to play a certain way. Win, lose, or whatever, we're not going to play poorly. We're not going to make dumb mistakes. We're not going to, like you said, miss blitz pickups with our running backs. Like, that's not going to happen. And it's incredibly refreshing to see that in any sport at Indiana, let alone a football program that has been so down for so long with brief 1 year, good year, and then fall off the cliff. It's a level of professionalism from a coaching staff I don't think we've seen at Indiana in a very long time in football.
Yeah, and what I would say, there's always, when you're building something, that season where it's kind of the ride up, especially if it's a little bit unexpected and a little bit better than you think. Like, you think about, the 2011, 2012 season for Tom Crean, our first season doing this show. It is so much fun. Indulge it. It's a different kind of excitement. Obviously,
when the expectations are not set yet.
Yeah, and we want to get to where Indiana's winning 8, 9, 10 games a year. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I mean, with Curt Cignetti's track record, if he builds what he's going to build and Indiana stays serious about football, that could happen here in a few years. But it's a different kind of expectation, and it's rewarding, but it's a different kind of fun. And it was just so much fun living vicariously through Galen and all the people who were out there in LA, because we've been there in different times ourselves. And it's just such a fun time to be a sports fan, and I love it here. Look, a lot of people down here in Texas, they'll say like, oh, college basketball is better when Indiana's good, but no one's rooting for Indiana basketball. But when Indiana's good, it's like, it's like the 12th kid on a youth basketball team who's shorter than everybody and doesn't really play much, but gets in and makes a shot and everybody's cheering. He's kind of like, because we're such a non-threatening football program.
You felt
so
that
a Missouri
way.
Fan, a Florida fan, everybody will cheer for Indiana. Like, this is awesome. So I'm over at my neighbor's house for my, his daughter's birthday party. Then everybody's just cheering for Indiana. And, it's fun. This time is so much fun to be a fan, but especially to be a fan of Indiana football. So I plan on thoroughly enjoying it. And it's just a feeling we haven't had a lot. So
we felt
it's
that
great.
During the pandemic season when Indiana was winning. They're on Sports Center. I had a radio station in San Diego call me because they wanted to talk about it because Indiana might be in the Big Ten championship. Nobody knew anything about Indiana football. It was just like, hey, bring the one guy we know who went there on to talk about it. It's like, guys, of all the Indiana people I know less about the football program than almost all of them. But sure, I'll come on and talk about it. But it's one of those things where you're the kid who's been picked on all the time, and all of a sudden you're punching back, and it'll be fun, man. It'll be fun to watch.
That's right.
And I will say this: whatever the end record of this team winds up being, you fans will feel way better about this season and how things look moving forward, just based on, again, the level of professionalism and the level of expectation that's been set, play to play, quarter to quarter, half to half, game to game. It's just so different. And so if they win 6 games this year, I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying it'll be a 6 games you feel way better about. And that you realize, hey, next year we can move to 8. Next year we can move to 10. That's what they're doing. And it's going to be really fun to watch.
Last thing, and we can hit this quickly, but I just thought it was interesting that you going to bounce, Andy?
Okay. Yeah, I got to go.
Yeah, take off, man.
Bye.
Final thoughts?
Good chatting with you guys. No, I had to stay for the IU football talk. It was exciting. My mom was visiting, and so we were excited watching the game. Some of the penalties, a little much, but I mean, Only IU could get called for
That's
roughing the
targeted.
passer on a sack. So there's still remnants of the IU football that we've come to know and love over the course of time. Even as we transition into this new era, there's still how exactly does one get called for that? Obviously, because according to Terry McCauley, he was in a passing posture. So. But
now our coach doesn't throw his gum or do like
Yeah.
a weird tirade on the sidelines. He just gets his team ready for the next play.
He
Yeah.
smolders a
Yes.
little and then gets
Yes.
his team
He
ready
does.
for the next
He
play.
does smolder. He does do that.
He does. But no, it's super exciting. We're hoping to get to a game, hopefully sometime in October if schedule allows. If not, then
Nice.
maybe November. But definitely want to get over there. It's been too long since I've been to a game, and excited to see what they've got going, and hopefully move to 4-0 on Saturday. So excited about that,
Yeah.
and good talking to you guys, and we will talk soon.
You too, man.
All right,
See you, Andy.
All right, thanks. Great work, Eddie, on the first one. Don't worry. I know you felt bad about a mistake or two here and there. You got a lot of catching up to do if you're worried about making mistakes. Coach and I probably have set the bar for those. So you got a ways to go till you should have any concern whatsoever. But we appreciate it. So
It's a good
awesome
time.
job.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, man.
All right, last thing we can talk about real quick, Ryan. I just thought it was really interesting, this release that came out from University of Tennessee. Boy, they're rolling in a couple sports, and they're thinking that the time is right. Let's strike while the iron's hot and squeeze our fans for as much as we can. And so if you didn't see, they basically put out this release that said, I don't know, they're increasing the season tickets for football by like 10 to 15%, whatever the number is. And they framed it as a talent tax. Basically, hey, if we want to keep winning, like things are going good because it's a relatively new AD. Football's winning and basketball's winning, and baseball's been great. And so if we want to keep this going, we have to pay for the talent. We have to keep this going. And it struck me immediately. I know, it's interesting timing also with this house settlement getting ready to be finalized. And so there's all those implications. I haven't studied it in depth enough to kind of know how that all plays out. All I know is I saw that, and my first thought was, because we talk to fans a lot, and we're fans ourselves who have donated to NIL, and we're not season ticket holders. But it just struck me as, man, like at some point, there's going to be a breaking point for college sports fans.
The well's going to run dry.
Yes. And I don't think this is it, especially at Tennessee, because especially if you look at a lot of the replies from their message board people, like they're fine with it because they're winning. So I'm not saying it's going to be for them, but I know talking to people in our community, talking to some, friends of mine, who are IU season ticket holders, they get it. They understand that ticket prices need to go up, but at some point you can only squeeze fans so much. And I really wonder if people are going to take just a marketing and PR lesson from this. Don't position it as a talent tax. You can raise the prices, but I think positioning that is going to turn off a lot of fans who are okay with NIL, and we're okay with, hey, we want players to get more money and they should get more of the TV package. They should be able to use their name, image, and likeness. Give me some avenues to donate where I can maybe get bonus content, or it, gives me access to a special luncheon or autographs. Yes, but don't. I don't know. Something rubbed me the wrong way about it.
It kind of feels gross.
Well, and you're squeezing the most important people in your fan base, who are your season ticket holders, who you need to go to games, especially, all that we've talked about with Packing the Rock and all that stuff. It's like, are these the people that you want to be squeezing? So I'm curious to get your thoughts, because I kind of get the rationale for it and why prices have to go up, but there's going to come a breaking point for fans, and B, I'm just not sure that positioning it as a talent tax is going to work in most places. I think Tennessee's in a unique position to do it where their fans aren't worried about it right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how much that's going to fly nationwide.
Couple down seasons, and it's not going to fly.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you giving us a refund if you don't
everything goes
well,
in cycles? Or if you don't, you're picking the wrong guys, you're paying the wrong guys. I mean, that's going to be the first thing. Look, they may be the first to do it. They will not be the last. Other teams are going to, or other programs are going to say this. The thing about NIL, and I think that what every fan can agree on, I mean, for the most part now, we're at this point, there are some people, every reasonable fan can agree on, is that players should be able to sell themselves for advertisements do all of that stuff, make money outside,
Yes.
the realms. Now it's going to get to this point where you can pay players directly and all of that stuff, and that's changing. But I think that the NIL, the idea of NIL is something that most fans could get behind. Is kids could market themselves to big time advertisers, make money off their name, the same thing that the university been doing for them for always. And on top of that, if people want to donate if boosters want to donate to these collectives and the collectives want to dole out money, that's fine too. I think the idea of the schools paying these guys directly with funds that come directly from fans in this manner is going to turn people off. And it may not initially, and it may not at Tennessee, but the idea of it is different than where we started out at like 3-4 years. Whenever NIL started, it feels like it was like last week, but it's been years now. And I think that the idea initially of being like, hey, these guys shouldn't have to be amateurs. They should be able to market themselves and be able to get this and that and the other thing. People all understood that and thought that was great. Then the collective thing still felt weird for a lot of people, like direct payments to players and creating contracts and all of that felt a little weird to most people. I talked to a lot of people who are on every side of this issue, and it felt weird for a lot of people. They're like, hey, this is the only way we can be competitive is to do this, and the NCAA is not outlawing us. A lot of people thought the NCAA would outlaw collectives, and not that anybody would have paid attention to what they said, but I mean, USC, for example, just knowing some inside stuff there, held off on creating a collective for a year and a half because they were like, we've had an NCAA problem years ago. We don't want to get on the wrong side of them on this. And they're acting like they're going to shut this down. I think the NCAA's lawyers pretty much came out and said, we can't do anything about this. So go ahead. And it's kind of a free for all. And USC was like, well, now we need to build a collective. But now this, like, here, we need to increase the athletic department budget to pay kids directly. I just think that you're right. Positioning as a talent tax is silly. It's the way they're selling it to their high dollar, season ticket holders, but just raising prices and saying, hey, this is how we're going to pay for everything, but specifically marketing it as payments that will go to players. It's going to tick people off. It really is. And I think that it may not at Tennessee. It may not if they do it at LSU. It may not if they do it at Alabama or Georgia. But when everybody else starts falling in line and trying to do this, it's going to upset people. And there is going to be a breaking point with this at some point where people are just like, all right, I mean, what are college sports anymore? And I mean, in some ways we're there now, but it will get there for the average, like, low-level casual fan who tunes into March Madness and the college football playoff and things like that, where they're just kind of like, the magic of this is kind of gone when it's that. And I don't necessarily agree, but I can see that happening with a lot of people. It's just because it's changing so much so fast.
Yeah.
That it's hard to even keep up with what's legal anymore. It just seems like everything's kind of legal. And I do think also we're getting to a point where somebody's going to put in some regulations, whether it's conferences or what, into how much you can pay people. Because, and I know this is happening, and it's been happening in the Pac-10 or Pac-12 for a long time, and now the Big Ten is starting to have to deal with it. Oregon has Nike just funding the athletic department. They can pay their third-string nose tackle $1 million a year if they want to. And in the transfer portal and in recruiting, Oregon's just getting a ton of guys. And then they're just like, well, we don't even have to play them because we're paying them so much more than anyone else will. They're just on the bench. And if somebody gets injured, we've got another 5-star guy to step up and play. And teams that are losing recruiting battles to them are like, we made a really good above market offer for them. And they didn't even consider us because they can just outbid us for everybody. And so Oregon's getting guys to keep them away from other schools, not to actually use them and basically warehouse them, on the team. And other schools are going to start doing that too, and just collecting as many guys as they want and just put them on the roster and pay them. And the guys can't turn it down because it's so much more money. That's going to start annoying other teams, and they're all going to start rebelling. And the have-nots in college sports are important because they have more votes in things like conferences and things like that. And when they decide, yeah, the money's great, but we're not getting as much of it because you're taking all the players, that's going to be an interesting time in college sports to see if things change. And Oregon's, I'm picking on Oregon, but they're not the only school doing that. There are other schools doing it too. And that's going to start to be a thing that happens. And the top teams are going to, well, we need more money because we need to compete with that. And then the halves like Oregon are going to be like, well, Nike, give us more money. And then, and it's just going to be this endless cycle. There's a reason most professional sports now have gone with a salary cap. And it's because people don't want to watch the same teams win all the time. And eventually that's going to get old. And so, yeah, I don't know. Like, I just think it's, again, changing a lot, and there's still a lot of moving pieces, and we don't know where this is going to settle.
So it's one thing for, big money donors and folks to put money in these first few years when it's new and exciting and you're trying to win. It's like, hey, we could have a competitive advantage. But the other reason there's salary caps in pro sports is because the owners want to cap themselves so that they, so there's a cap on how much they can pay, because they don't trust themselves because they would have to keep outbidding. So it'll be interesting. Some of it's generational, older fans like us and folks older. It's not just like, hey, okay, now there's a talent tax. It's also that, the conferences that we like are all different. The rivalries we like sometimes aren't there. We're getting squeezed every direction to have to pay for Peacock and every different, network to watch the games. And so it just, death by 1,000 cuts, and at what point does it start to turn? I know it's already turned some people off. Others, it's having no effect. And so we'll see, we'll see what happens. I just thought that was really interesting. I would certainly expect ticket prices to keep going up. I will be interesting if anybody else positions it this way, because I don't think there's any benefit to doing it this way. And so I think people will be looking and maybe saying,
you're right, this will happen, but whether or not it's called a talent tax or whatever, it'll just be obvious what it is. I mean, and so yeah,
that's all right. We'll let Tennessee be out front doing the dumb stuff, and then everybody else can follow after them.
I mean, they've been doing it for years. It's just they've been successful lately. It's,
yeah, finally, I know they have their couple years of success, and then they're, they think they're hot stuff. They'll fall back. Should have beaten them in that damn bowl game.
Should have.
I know. All right, I think that is everything. Are we? Any other final thoughts from you? Are we ready to?
I think we're ready to get out of here, man. This was good. This is a wide-ranging discussion, we'll call it.
This was good. By the way, so we're doing that ticket giveaway with Hoosier Ticket Project. If you have an answer to that trivia question, what answer did my dad give to the game in the Mallory era that really got, especially the players, believing in what they were doing? He's always talked about it as a turning point for what they were doing early on in the Mallory era. Email me, jared@assemblycall.com. The first person to email me the game correctly, I will reply back, and we'll figure out what to do with the tickets, because Hoosier Ticket Project is going to hook you up with 4 tickets. So yeah. All right. With that being said, let's close things up here. That is going to do it for us on this week's edition of the Assembly Call. As always, if you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Thank you, as always, to Bob Thompson for producing our music. Thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logos. Thank you to producer Eddie for being here and adding a really cool new element to our show that we're excited about. And thank you for listening. Until then, until we're here again, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
I think they've gotten enough show.
I got to get you that one, Eddie. Awesome job, Eddie. Any mistakes are all on me, because it means that I didn't give you the right files and the right stuff. So we kind of did this. We had a little bit of a shotgun approach to get ready here, but we figured we'd do a live test. And so we'll continue to make it better and add some new elements to the show as we move forward, which we can do having an awesome producer here. So
yeah,
very excited
it was a lot
that.
of fun. I there were things that obviously I saw too. I was like, oh, I'd love if I could throw this in or pipe this in. And obviously there are a few mistakes on my part trying to get some of those late Signetti ads in at the end.
That I heard you doing that. It's all good, man.
I'm sure you heard it, but I'll try to turn those up so people can hear them. But yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. It's definitely better to be on this side of it, because now I get to play for next week or two, trying to figure out what we can do to really spice it up.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody who's here live. We will. When are we doing another one? Oh, we didn't schedule our October shows yet. But we're gonna try and increase the frequency now as we move forward since the season's getting closer.
And if not,
we'll
just turn into a football show. It's
Hey, I mean it is in the cards. It's in the cards. We'll probably do another one. I know we'll do one before Hoosier Hysteria. And we may do another one prior to that, but we'll ramp them up. We'll announce them on Substack. We'll announce them on Twitter when we're going to be here. They'll most likely be on Thursday nights, like we always do. We'll let you know. Take care, everybody. Talk to you soon.